Boom. All right, everybody, welcome. This is the BuildBrand podcast. I'm Johnny. This is probably the most excited I've ever been for one of these conversations. We have Bill Shufelt from Athletic Brewing Company. Um, I couldn't be a bigger fan than I discovered this maybe 3 years ago at the height of COVID. I'd been drinking like IPAs for 6 months straight, and then I discovered a non-alcoholic option, and I became an absolute super fan of the brand. And now they worked with Current in the past, and the founder and CEO is here sitting in front of us. So, Bill or Billy, thank you for coming on. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So to all of our millions and millions of listeners, if you guys don't know who Athletic Brewing is, you probably will have at this point, but they are a non-alcoholic craft beer company, and they are absolutely blowing up. I drink them all of the time. It's quite literally a game changer. And Bill, I know you've probably done a million of these, but please tell me the origin story, just because I've never even heard it from the dogs, from
For
the
sure.
founders. So
Yeah. I mean, it's honestly like so much more simple than you'd think. It's like one of those like classic, like very simple hiding in plain sight things. And then when you take a step back, you're like, yeah, why wasn't that a thing? Because it's just like a normal, busy modern adult. I like going to bars, I like going out with colleagues, I love food, I love beer. Probably like 80% of the population does, but also I'm like super busy. And I was turning 30, I was about to get married, and like some of like the key foundational variables of my life. So say like sleep, working out, productivity at work, relationships, and like social things, maybe. Like my generally like improving my health and performance was like a big thing as I was like turning 30 and like taking my career and life more seriously.
sure.
And I kind of had this realization. I was like, man, I kind of drink like 5 nights a week, even if it's in really small quantities, because I'm like always at work dinners and stuff. And this alcohol is actually a ceiling on all of those variables I just listed, from like sleep to health to work performance to relationships to working out. And I cut it out and I just felt amazing. And it was like this virtuous circle. I was sleeping better, I was working out better, all those things. I was having like the best year of work I've ever had. And I was like, I'm not going to start drinking again. But then I realized there just aren't any options out there. If you want to be a little bit more moderate and still socialize, like there was no adult beverage options that were exciting out there. And that like blew my mind. And I started looking around while I was out at bars and restaurants. I was like, a lot of these people really aren't drinking that much alcohol. Like, I was like, why aren't there a lot better options to like keep people here longer and like invite a lot more people in? And so I had this like stirring of an idea, but then after like 2 years of business research on it, I realized that like I could actually have a huge positive impact on society. And like all those variables I talked about, if this was just a thing, if it was cool and it was ready and available. And so I actually was like, I'm gonna quit my job and do this. And it was like the first time I've ever had like an entrepreneurial fire lit. I had no goal whatsoever to be an entrepreneur. And before I knew it, and talking to my wife, like she really encouraged me to go after it and quit my job. And there I was about 7 years ago, like quitting my job a couple of years after I had this idea. And it's really been one of those things where like I was taking a very normal adult experience that seemed very simple. And when I shared that with people or like started to provide products on the shelf at like Whole Foods, and like people were looking for this, the industry just wasn't meeting them where they're at. And so it's been one of those really fun things, is like people discover it, and we kind of just think of it as like beer for the modern busy adult.
I love it. It's so funny. I was thinking, it's like you always hear these entrepreneurs and these tech people. It's like it's all about solving a problem. Like, what problem are you solving? And like you guys solved like one of the most universal problems, in the fact that like if you have 3 or 4 really delicious tasting like IPA beers, like you will have a hangover. And like
Hmm.
that's honestly like why I've like fallen in love with it, because I myself, like, I'm one of those people who like I go in phases where like all right, I'm going to go dry for the next 3 months or whatever. I'm not like fully sober, but what has given me the ability to do that is literally your beers, because I love the taste of like a delicious, like nice IPA at the end of the day. And when I discovered this, I'm like, oh wait, this tastes the same, if not actually better. And I could drink 3 or 4 or 5 and not have a hangover. It was like such a game changer and
And
so such a big problem.
yeah, and you can drink any night of the week also, not just Friday night, Saturday night. It's like, oh, I can drink any night of the week and feel good about it. Or how many times have you heard people say, oh, I'm going to go out and have one drink? But like what is your plan after that one drink? Like everyone says that, but like
Oh,
there's like no game plan after that. And now athletic, like you can go out and have your one alcoholic drink and then have a bunch of drinks after and feel fine about it, you know? So it's
totally.
there's like so many variations of this problem that have emerged too that like it solves for.
Yeah, it's and I'm like the like speaking from my perspective, I'm one of those type of people where it's like I just want to like a drink in my hand, like you know what I mean? Just because
Hmm.
I like the cold, refreshing feeling. It's not like I need to get drunk. And that what was happening over COVID, where I'm just like, okay, drinking all the time. And then I'm like, oh, this can totally solve this. So it's great. So you mentioned you did this at 30. Like when you were younger, were you like, I want to be an entrepreneur at some point? Like first of all, what were you doing before then? Like what type of corporate job did you have? But were you like waiting on a good idea to pounce, or were you just like, oh, this is a no brainer?
No, I was in finance and I reasonably liked my job, but it was a good economic opportunity. And I had no intention of ever being an entrepreneur. Like I didn't have like 50 mediocre ideas and finally had a good one. It was I never had an idea and like never ever thought I'd be an entrepreneur. Um, yeah, so
But walk us like, I want to double click into like, you like, yeah, I quit my job in finance and started this, and my wife was cool with it. So it's fine. Like, because I know there were probably so many steps, or was she
well
not cool with
that's
it?
that's probably the biggest part is like I didn't even realize I had an idea until my wife pointed out that I had an idea. And then also I wasn't gonna actually quit my job until my wife was like, you need to quit your job. So like I had this like really strong buy-in from inside my household, which was like so important. I can't
Sure.
imagine how hard it would be the opposite way if you were like taking a big risk and put your family at risk and didn't necessarily have the buy-in. And so that was like super important. My wife has played such a big part in that like athletic journey for that reason.
Oh, that's beautiful. So wait, so talk to me about like, so you get this idea and then like the mechanics of like, do you go start hitting up random breweries and like, hey, could you try to like brew something just with no alcohol? Like, how did that actually, like the blocking and tackling of that?
Yeah, I mean, I read every textbook I could get my hands on. I did assume I would contract brew to start, but everyone kind of said no, which in hindsight was like a good decision on their part too. Like I didn't have any idea what I was doing. So like why would someone help me make it? Um, and I ended up then having to build a brewery. So I did 120 investor meetings to raise enough money to build a physical brewery, which was the first brewery ever at the time in the country dedicated to non-alcoholic beer production.
Wow.
And there's still like almost zero breweries in the country that are dedicated to non-alcoholic beer that aren't owned by Athletic Brewing. Like most people definitely outsource this, and so it's something that like we made this decision to go like really capital intensive, and then I've like doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down on that decision many times over.
It's insane. And do you like, because there have been, I'm sure you, I mean, you of course have seen all these articles, but isn't the younger generation like not drinking as much? Like, isn't that a whole thing? And do you think that's because of
So
your stuff, or like people can now just get edibles? Like, what is like, why is that?
well, I think it's kind of like all these things, but it is somewhat of like the chicken and the egg too.
Mhm.
Like 10 years ago, if you wanted to socialize and not drink, there weren't any options out there. So it was like you'd go out and you'd have to get like a soda or a water or something. And there weren't name brand drinks on menus that like you could order excitedly. So there like really weren't options to be more moderate. So like sure, like this generation is more moderate than previous generations, but like there really weren't options for prior generations to be more moderate. So like I think it's natural with availability, distribution, marketing behind exciting products that like people will make this choice with some frequency. But that being said, in my generation, call it millennials, 32% of legal drinking age adults don't consume alcohol. In Gen Z, it's 45%.
Oh,
So like
wow.
it has changed a lot in like 10 years. So
Wow.
yeah.
So normally like on this little podcast, we talk about creators and influencer marketing and content and TikTok shop and all of that type of stuff. And I know you're like the boss, so you have people like managing all of these different businesses, but I'm sure you oversee everything. But do you have any examples or wins where you had like a piece of content like went absolutely crazy for you guys and like you saw a huge uptick, like maybe a celebrity like made a video, or maybe just your random guy next door made a video that popped off?
Well, I mean, the whole marketing was my cell phone for like 2 years. Like I was customer service, I was social, I was marketing. So definitely I was like very close to all the details of that for a while. And now we have an incredibly talented team who like does all different versions of that stuff. I think at the end of the day, it's like authenticity resonates the most,
Sure.
is what we found. And the people who have like organically fallen in love with our product and then wanted to talk about it is always the stuff that like influencers who reach out to us or like get it. Like the difference between someone we have to like convince to work with us and someone who is like excited to work with us is like night and day. And
Yep.
so like much rather pass on like a bunch of influencers who don't really get it and don't really want to work with us to find one that really does. Makes all the difference. I'd say one of the earliest things that like totally blew up like pretty early. Matt Frazier, the 7-time CrossFit champion, he's like basically like fittest guy on the planet,
Yep.
and rightfully so, has an enormous social media following. He was actually doing a brand post for another brand, but in his hand he had an athletic beer, and like we weren't working together at the time, and like all the comments were about the beer, and like that absolutely blew up and was like probably like our best marketing thing ever at that time. And it was
Sure.
free and organic, but like I immediately reached out to him and was like, we'd love to build on this and like build on the authenticity. And like he did naturally like drink our beer during training and everything. And so that was a really good example of authenticity. I think another recent one that worked out really well is we collaborated with the country music star Walker Hayes to make a
Okay.
beer called Fancy Like. And but like the way we like teamed up with him was he was on Instagram complaining about non-alcoholic beer, and we like sent him beer, and he fell in love with our beer, and then we had him up for a brewery tour, and like we just really got along, and it was super authentic, and like I think that partnership has been so good because like we're having so much fun to begin with before we even got to the partnerships status. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting what you guys like why you guys are like so head and shoulders against the rest is that like when I thought of a non-alcoholic beer, I thought of the duels, and that like kind of screamed like this person has a drinking problem and can't be drinking
Mm-hmm.
anymore. But have you guys like intentionally been like, no, like this isn't, you don't have to be like a hardcore AA sober person. Like that's not the beer. This is actually just a really good tasting beer. And it's for like more of like the athletic person or more of just the more health conscious person, not necessarily like I'm the sober hardcore addict.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the word sober is outdated. It's
Yeah,
like, most people, so like the perception growing up was like, oh, 1% of people are not drinking 1% of the time. Where really, if you look around, it's like 99% of adults are not drinking 99% of the time. And there's like very specific situations that alcohol works.
yep,
And most of life, alcohol does not work. And
sure.
so, like, why not make awesome products that fit in that enormously large pool of occasions that for some reason has been very overlooked?
Cool.
So,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
it's funny. Like I think I messaged you. So in conjunction with the things I do in like influencer and content and all of that stuff, I've had like this very modest music career in a band called Modern Love Child. And I got signed to a label and went over to London, like similar, not like I didn't start a company, but like I had a job in LA and I like had a life and I had a girlfriend and I like totally like uprooted and was like, fuck it, I'm going to I'm going to London and recording this album. And I went on tour and like kind of like lived out like my little fantasy like rock star life as like the small opening act. But as you can imagine, like those tours and just the people in the music industry, like it's especially the Brits, like they booze so heavy. Like it's just part of the culture. And it's also part of like, if you're in the studio making music, if you're like on, on a tour after the shows, like you're drinking beers, right? And normally the venue's giving you a case of beer in your green room. When I like started working in ABs, I was like, this has changed my life because it was just so like in that world of like, okay, like after the show, drink 6 beers. So like it was a total game changer. So as like music, like have you leaned? I'm assuming you're leaning into every vertical, but then you also mentioned the Walker Hayes guy. But as music, has like that angle been something on your mind?
For sure, yeah. And that's awesome, by the way. That's like so cool that you did that. Yeah, I would say like the natural outreach from the music community. Like musicians are like total badass athletes who like, tours and like recording blocks and stuff is like big grueling sprints. And like we hear that a lot is that and we've had a lot of name brand people in the music world reach out to us and say they
I'm
just like
sure.
crush our beers. And um yeah, there's like we're definitely kind of thinking of all different ways to work together with some of them. But it's yeah, music has been one of those things. I would say like athletes, obviously, musicians,
Yep.
and chefs too
Oh,
is
because
like a
chefs are
very
booze hounds and they love the good
yeah,
alcohol
but
and food and stuff. But yeah,
all these careers are so stressful and like they get so amped up during the moment, like which chefs and like performing on that night is like a big stressful thing. And then they want to wind down and celebrate after. And like this is
yep.
a nice segue for them for sure.
Are you guys, and excuse me if you're like, yeah, duh, we're everywhere, but are you guys international? Like if I were in London, could I get like a pint of the hazy
So
or whatever?
just recently, we're pretty well distributed in Canada. UK, we're getting there. We're in all the Tesco's and we're getting in a lot more pubs now. So,
Nice.
yeah, both in package and on draft. So it's pretty exciting.
Dude, where can I find it on draft? Like in here in America or in Miami? Do you know offhand? Because
Yeah,
I love a draft beer.
I don't think many places in Miami yet, but on our store finder, you can literally
Okay.
click the checkbox. It's like on tap, and we have breweries in Connecticut and San Diego, and so we've kind of expanded out from there on draft. And but I would expect Florida to get hit pretty hard with draft in the coming
Sweet.
months for sure, especially as it gets hot this summer.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, last question, I guess, and you're kind of getting into it, but what's the future? Like, are you guys more locations? Obviously, you guys are, you have your core beers, but like just always tweaking and making new recipes. Like what can we see from Athletic Brewing in the next, 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, we launch almost 50 beers a year on athleticbrewing.com. So there's a lot of fun variety on there. But then we hope to get in more and more stores locally too, where so people can grab their favorite beers for the best prices locally. And really building awareness too. It's, in places we are sold, non-alcoholic beers very often more than 10% of all beer sold. But like we're just not sold in that many places yet. So we think there's a big place in the future, like a big healthy place for this category in the future. But like we're in like the first hour of the first inning still here, it feels like.
Well, dude, I'm super excited that I'm like, it's funny because like I'm just so happy that this product exists. You know what I mean? I'm like
Thank you.
so happy that like someone figured this out because at least for me, I'm constantly like, trying to be like you said at the top of our conversation about you're 30, you want to get better with your job, your relationships, like all of that stuff. And I know like it's very hard to argue against the fact that if you like significantly cut out alcohol, like you will be happier and more productive and all of those things. And the this has been such like an amazing tool, like personally for me, like it's helped me get in better shape
Thank you.
and like I started doing CrossFit and all that shit, and it would have never happened if I didn't find your product. So thank you for that. Thank you for coming on, and yeah, dude, wish you the best of luck. And I want you guys to take over the world. So You'll get it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I mean, I'm customer number one. I'm like, for the reasons you just articulated are exactly why we exist. So it's to give people options that they're excited about and like really be the best part of everyone's day. So appreciate that
All right. Well, thank you so much, man.
for sure.